Good morning, Todd. Good morning, Dragon Slayers. Sadly, a former military retiree, I believe, took out a total of more than 20 people, plus about 50 people injured in Lewiston, Maine yesterday. And it gets to the question of multiple things. What provoked this? Well, apparently the gentleman was mentally ill.
Right.
Uh, we don't know his psychiatric history. We don't know if he was voicing homicidal thoughts prior to this. But it does beg the question, why do we have assault weapons in our society right now? You know, we're not using it to hunt deer. Uh, the and some contain, well, I would like to have the freedom to go to a range and shoot my assault weapon, but at what cost?
Right.
At the loss of kids, at the loss of people, at the loss of innocence. And I think it's about time that people mobilized enough support and energy to promote an assault weapon ban. There's too many tragedies, and the cascade of events that follow those tragedies can continue for generations. I think one of the things that's very real, this is Lewiston, Maine. This is not a combat zone. Uh, and very appropriately, one gentleman who was interviewed, apparently his daughter was at a film in that area, said, there's no safe space. Well, there is no safe space for us. And we need to do something about that. So that's one point. The other point I wanted to talk about, and I touched on it last time, and one of my listeners inquired, what was I talking about when I was talking about cognitive dissonance?
Okay.
Okay. The concept is it's just a PhD term for how we seem to take our perceptions and have our perceptions fit a narrative. For example, in a playful way, we may be at a football stadium, and one of us may be a fan of the Minnesota Vikings, and the other might be a fan of the 49ers. And we see what could be an interference call. Now, we're going to channel our perceptions of that event predicated on which team we're cheering for.
Yes. And I did. And there were terrible calls. Terrible calls.
But as we write this larger, then we can understand two things that are going on. One is when there's conflict, we often become tribal. We kind of regress to that tribal instinct. And we have seen such denial of reality in recent weeks coincident to the conflict in the Middle East. We can witness, anybody who's interested, unfortunately, can witness the catastrophic effect that the Hamas terrorist attacks have had on families. There are abundant interviews now of relatives of people that were captured or witnesses that saw people captured, and depicting all sorts of barbaric events. And yet, nonetheless, we still have people who are demonstrating in the streets because they have their freedoms to deny any of this and allege that this was all a conspiracy and this is all manufactured. Even to the point, sadly, I saw flags on TV at least of people in this country carrying banners saying Hitler had a good idea. So when you look at that level of insanity, how do you account for it? Well, you account for it because the tribe demands that you perceive events in just this way. If you happen to be hostage ideologically to a progressive institution where both the professors and the students have a common mantra in terms of how they perceive the world, that the world is a place where they are exploited, where minorities are cruelly exploited, where there's imperialism. All of these things become manifest when you attempt to come forward and say, okay, let's look at this event, what really happened. it's very hard to see it clearly. And that's what we're experiencing right now. And unfortunately, although we have free speech, apparently there's been some blowback recently, uh, at least among Harvard alums. Many Harvard alumni and other great institutions are in positions of power to hire. And if one has this opinion and you're demonstrating it freely in the streets, you may not be able to have a career path. So there will be consequences. Well, the other thing I'd like to talk about is, Todd, your own heroism. How did you move from an IT graduate to developing what is, I can testify to, a wonderful culture in this little niche where you're making elite sandwiches and you've got the Bombshelter, which is a very appropriately named radio now.
Yeah, right. It was appropriately named in 1999 also when we started it.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd like to know that history. I think our listeners would too.
So what happened was I grew up in Northern California, came to UNR in 1994.
Mhm.
And I was like, computers, everything, I played video games. So I wanted to do something in computers. So I became a CS major, computer science major, IT type stuff, and hated it. Absolutely hated it. But one of my work study jobs on campus was to pick up computers from different departments at UNR and bring them back to our shop to work on them. So one day I had an order to pick up these 4 Macintosh computers, and it was in the art department.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, why would there be computers in the art department? So I cruise up to the art department to pick up these computers, and I discover what is called, now known as, a digital media lab. Printers, computers, monitors everywhere, art being created with computers.
Mm-hmm.
Blew my mind, dropped my CS major, became an art major, and became a graphic designer. And that's been my actual trade other than sandwiches for 25
So
years.
you were trained as part of your education as a graphic designer.
Mostly trained with an art major because digital media in the mid 90s was brand new. There was no internet. There was the beginning of the internet, Mosaic browsers, the JPEGs that loaded like this. Do you remember those guys?
Yeah.
So we're at the very advent of what would be known now as the internet. So
kind of interesting coincidental path. In ancient days, virtually before you were born. When were you born?
73.
Before you were born.
Okay.
Okay. A few years. I was this kid that had made it to the Ivy West, Stanford, and I had been very interested, coincident to my Peace Corps experience in cultural anthropology. So it was a freebie. I was promoted to a position where you could actually go to grad school while you're in residency. So I entered the graduate program in anthropology.
Nice.
Well, I maxed out all my credits, did my little thesis, but I still had other credits. Well, coincident to that, a buddy and I were doing television facilitated interviewing as a part of psychotherapy. And the game we would play is that we would have a patient and doctor speaking about important things, trauma, whatever it may be. And then we would record that, pull them inside, and ask them what were they experiencing at the time in the interview. Now, it worked in 2 really neat ways. One was the psychiatrist got a sense of what the patient was experiencing as a consequence of what he or her asked or how he responded. The patient, in turn, had an opportunity to, again, re-experience whatever was going on and to make sense of it. Well, when I got into that, I wanted to know more about television production and film production. So I ended up in the Stanford Film School.
Wow, that's cool.
And, did my own movies.
Wow, that's amazing.
I wasn't quite George Lucas or Steven Spielberg, but whatever.
Scott and I dug into our old YouTube channel yesterday and found some 20-year-old videos that we made. Just straight up television show type content. Like, hey, how you doing today? Just hilarious stuff.
So anyway, that's how you got into it.
Right. And then
but how did you get to the point? Now, this was how many years ago?
This was 94 to 99, 98, 99.
Okay. So this has now been 24, 25 years
Yep.
since you were launched.
Right.
And what was your work path?
Well, my work path straight out of college in the mid to late 90s, if you knew anything about IT, computers, or the internet, then you could get yourself a job at a company. Hey, I'll be your computer guy. Basically, I'll set up computers, I'll unjam printers, I'll make flyers for you, I'll do this stuff. So I did that for a few years and just hated it. Like, absolutely ended up hating it. Started off loving it, and some bad bosses and bad stuff at that place made me dislike it.
Well, I'm aware, actually, among my patient load, I'm fortunate I've got some pretty geared up people, many of whom are in IT. One of the problems of IT is you're almost speaking a foreign language. So I come to you and say, hey, Todd, this isn't working. Fix it.
Right.
And
what do? We turn it off and we turn it on and it's fixed. That was my whole job.
Well, yeah, but it could be more complicated.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then I'll come back to you.
1% of the time, it was more complicated than a reboot.
And, inevitably, Microsoft will have to do another download and upgrade of Windows, whatever.
Right.
And everything has gone to hell.
Everything. No printers work anymore.
Why didn't you fix it?
Right. Oh, boy. So being the computer guy at work was stressful. So I actually got fired from that job because
Why?
I automated myself out of a job. We ran a online store, and I just automated every aspect of it. All you had to do was just slap a sticker on a box and send it in the mail. And so eventually I was not needed at the job anymore. And it was always supposed to be a temporary job that turned into like a 4 or 5 year gig.
No doubt you patented all those processes and you're still living on the royalties.
Yeah, I wish, yeah. But Scott worked there too. I was the IT computer guy. Scott was a boat salesman. And so they kept Scott on board. A boat salesman, literally.
Yeah.
And so I started doing my own thing. Had some health problems back around that time. Probably coincided with the stress of losing my job and stuff, honestly.
Well, no question. I mean, I think it's also...
That's when the Crohn's presented, was 98.
It speaks to the toxicity of work stress.
Right. So randomly, Scott was at a boat show in Sacramento, and we had this favorite sandwich shop that we went to from 1981 till, gosh, when we moved away in 94. Just absolutely ate there weekly, our whole lifetime. And Scott happened to pop in there for a sandwich because he was in town. And the owner said, oh, God, guess what? We're franchising these now, and slapped the franchise agreement on the top of the counter to Scott. Scott was like, wow, that's crazy. I can't imagine being my own boss. I'm not that guy. But he took the franchise agreement and randomly a year or so later opened up a horoscope, and it said something about go back and check old business cards. And he went and found an old business cards, and it was one of the people that had given him the franchise information. And he came to me and he said, hey, we have equity in our house. What do you think about opening a deli, a beach hut deli? And I was like, well, I think Reno would eat it up, literally. And that's kind of what happened.
Well, it's interesting as you watch the history of your place, there have been other established sandwich delis.
Absolutely.
But you guys have rocketed to the top, haven't
you? We don't get the recognition in town like we should. They still say Porta Subs is the best sandwich in Reno.
Oh, God.
And then...
forgive me. Porta Subs fans, I just got to tell you, Porta Subs is okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
It won't kill you.
No.
But you got to go by Beach Hut.
Appreciate you. Yeah, it's a unique, it's like what do we say, it's worth the wait, but we'll spell wait WEIGHT, because they're big sandwiches,
right?
So you get what you pay for at Beach Hut Deli. But yeah, it was an interesting trajectory. And then this next step was we opened the arcade in this room, and then the COVID hit and no one could use the arcade. You couldn't touch the machines, you couldn't bring food or drink anywhere, you couldn't even come in the restaurant for a year. And having this square footage just doing nothing was tough financially.
Right.
So that's when we decided to bring my silkscreen stuff down here, because all that stuff was in my garage. And then Scott and I do the Bombshelter, which is a radio show we started in 1999. We've done it weekly on 102.9 FM in Reno, Tahoe since 1999. And we just brought all of our stuff down here. And now it's become like this it's literally the Bombshelter now.
So for listeners out there, what I really love, I've known Todd well for how many years has it been?
We're going on 4 years.
4 years, yeah. And what is remarkable about Todd is that, he has had some health challenges. but he's incredibly creative. And what he's been able to do is he's almost scanning the environment constantly about opportunities to use his creativity. And he's now at a point where your clothing business is quite successful, isn't it?
It's doing very well.
Yeah.
The screen printing is doing very, very well.
Okay.
And the deli's always done very well. But as we go into the slow season for the deli, the shirt season starts to take off, hoodies.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been interesting. And I got some.
Maybe you need to change the logo from Beach Hut to Igloo.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little chilly today, right?
Right.
But yeah, interesting adventure that it's been.
Uh-huh.
I just turned 50 a couple months ago, and I'm as happy now and healthy now as I've been in my whole life.
Because you're doing what you love to do, which is the other point I would make to folks out there. I've had a variety of positions, some management positions, a lot of clinical stuff that I enjoy doing. I write a little bit, but hard work isn't a problem. I mean, hard work is kind of an endurance event.
Right.
What really grinds you down is the insane conflicts that you get in trying to work in the context of always an unthinking bureaucracy.
Right.
Bureaucracy is not a term. Unthinking is always there.
Well, it sounds like you got run out of some pretty cool jobs by not liking the environment.
Well, I chose to flame out.
Right.
One story is I was kind of a little bit of a boy wonder when I was named commissioner of behavioral health in the state of Arizona. And that was largely coincident to my long distance running relationships. And I happened to be running a marathon, and right beside me was the then Attorney General for the state of Nevada, Bruce Babbitt. And he was kind of struggling. And so I kind of ran with him and made sure that he was well hydrated. We finished it. And then fast forward a few years, and Attorney General Babbitt became Governor Babbitt. And Governor Babbitt was a very decent man, a very decent governor, and had decided that he wanted to do something about behavioral health in the state of Arizona. Arizona, along with Nevada, was near the bottom of the 50 states in terms of per capita expenditures for behavioral health purposes.
Oh, wow.
So I had actually just resigned from a job where I was the medical director of a large health organization, again, because of a value conflict.
Right.
And I was out running, and I came back from my run, and my then wife said, "The governor's on the phone for you." And
wow.
So I said, "Okay, Gov, what you need?"
Yeah, right.
And it started out great. Unfortunately, he was a lame duck governor. And the person that succeeded him had minimal awareness and certainly minimal sympathies for behavioral health.
Right, which is tough.
So I did that for a couple of years and was kind of fighting a rearguard action against all the resistance. And I learned several things. One is I'm not a politician. That takes a special capacity for what the late Steve Jobs would say, manufacturing your own reality distortion field and perceiving people who are not terribly intelligent and not terribly sensitive as people that you can actually speak to and value. And that's a stretch. I tried to do it.
I miss Steve.
Yeah, he was kind of a cool guy.
Yeah, he was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Changed the world.
He did. Some people, he was polarizing, but he was passionate.
Right.
And
I don't think he was the nicest guy in the world.
Well, he had a mission. And I would say Steve Jobs was the entrepreneurial equivalent of George Patton, anybody who knows the history of World War II, who was a hard-ass general, wouldn't take any crap from anybody. And
get her done.
Yeah. So he was actually at Apple running a military campaign.
Right.
We got to do something that's relevant. And you see the seeds of that creativity that has survived, how many years since his death?
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The trajectory of what he created is just Still taking off.
And you know where he began Apple Computer, don't you?
Yes.
In a garage in
Abs-
Mountain View, California.
yes, sir. With his bestie.
So, those are heroic stories. And I think it's great if we can have that opportunity to develop those in our own lives. I'll speak to several people that I know that have taken remarkable trajectories and done something with it. I think one of the things though that I liked about your story, and I would, I've never had a chance to comment to you about it, but for those of you out there who think that you're just going to drop out of college and screw it and you're going to do your creative thing, I think it is important to complete the basic disciplines that will allow you to get a sense, well, I've mastered this. I can handle that.
Right. I almost quit my last semester. I think I told you that.
Right.
Like I got to like 6 credits away from graduation and I was going to quit because I thought that I'd learned enough.
But that's crazy.
It's crazy, but I had it in my head that it made all the sense in the world that I was going to go get a good job in graphic design and I didn't need the diploma. In hindsight, the diploma was exactly what I needed. I needed to jump through that flaming hoop so that I understood that that's how it works.
Well, that's part of the problem is if you're a young person, and we've all done this. I did this both in undergraduate and medical school. There are some things that we go through that's just part of the rite of passage, and it doesn't seem to make much sense. But from the outside, if, for example, if I said, well, screw it, I don't want to take that course.
Right.
Well, my MD degree goes into the cellar and I'm toast. So you do the best you can if you're in a course of study. If you're in the course of study, you're going to have to mobilize yourself to get through the next 2, 3, or 4 years to get that ticket.
Right.
And my fantasy when I was taking courses, particularly in medical school, both my brother and my dad had apparently for the first time when they went through it, my dad in medical school, my brother in dental school, they both failed pathology. Now, actually, I kind of like pathology. It explains disease and everything else.
Right.
But I went into every course in medical school as much as possible, as if I was going to be that doctor. So when I took pathology, I was like going to be a pathologist.
Gotcha.
Particularly a forensic pathologist, which really followed me through the rest of my career. So everything I did with that notion. And that's how you become successful. You visualize how are you going to use it. There must be some way. There has to be a pony in this learning someplace. Right.
You want to know how I got through it?
How'd you get through it?
My dad sat me down and said, Todd, you're going to be the first college graduate on both sides of the family in history ever. No one on either side of your family has ever graduated from college. You're going to be the first one. Do the last 6 credits, bro. And so so I did it and graduated. And then Scott soon after, less than a year after Scott graduated. And then, like I said, we went on to jobs that made sense after college, got loans, got cars, bought a house, and just kind of fell out of love with 9 to 5. It just wasn't for either one of us at all.
The problem with 9 to 5, it's either both too much or insufficient.
Right.
That is, if you're going to be creative, I don't work 9 to 5. I'm working, at least in my head, all the time.
Right.
And well, I sleep a bit, but for the most part, your job, if you need, ideally, my wish in this world is that our young people would be educated sufficiently so that they could harness their creativity in behalf of their work life. Work is part of purpose, and you're fortunate if you have a purpose that you love, and that's your job, and you get paid for it. What? I get paid for this?
What do they say? If do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And that's this chapter of my life is I just jump out of bed in the morning to come and live this life. I love it.
So you and I are in the same place because it's hard for me to hang up my spikes,
right?
Because I get to talk to great people and occasionally the insurance companies pay us, and life is good.
Well, when I met you, I was struggling a bit, and you just told me, or you asked me, you said, "Do you have something that you love, that you adore. And I told you music and DJing was my favorite thing in the world. And you said, well, just do it every day. Do it every day until further notice. And I have been since I met you 6 days a week, been on those turntables, and it changed my whole life. And like you said, it was something I could look forward to that I love to do. After working on something, maybe I don't love to do so much for 8 hours, you know?
But
I do it with people that I love, which is cool.
but that's the other thing. And for anyone out there, it's really important to select a culture if you're going to be working that is harmonious with your values, where you admire people, where you have some mentoring, you have some collegial relationships, because you're spending a lot of your time. And, in my own case, I'm very fortunate in that my colleagues and my office support staff kind of like family. I mean, I love going to work.
Right. Now you have an incredible staff. Wow.
Yeah, and they're great. And and you look forward to that. And if you can build those cultures or find those cultures, you're home free.
Right.
And if you happen to be an executive, one of your values ought to be, in addition to getting performance from your people and leading your people, if you are in that position, you make certain that that culture reinforces a strong value system where people feel taken care of. I want to listen to your perspective on what we're doing here. How can we do it better? And so
Well,
on.
I mean, you can rule with the iron fist, as they say. It just doesn't work. I mean, in my experience, it just doesn't.
A simple dichotomy. There's an awareness model of learning. And I think we talked about this before.
Absolutely.
You take in a little 5-year-old kid and traffic's going both ways. You can either grab the kid by his arm or her arm and say, don't go there. Or you can say, now, do you understand how to cross the street? Yeah, no, daddy. Okay, so what we have to do, we go to the end of the block, we look for the traffic light. And even though there are no cars coming, we can't see everything. And cars come much faster than we can walk. So we wait for the green light and cross the street. And we look both ways.
Right.
Well, what happens when there's no light? Well, you look both ways and you make certain before you cross the street. And ideally, you cross at the end of the block rather than in the middle of the block, because drivers aren't expecting to see you then.
Right.
That's how you stay alive. Well, in the same sense, the awareness model works at work too. I think we may have even mentioned this last time. You have a conflict with your boss, and your boss says, hey, Jack, you did it wrong.
Right.
and Jack is thinking, well, yeah, I did it different. I may have done it wrong. You can do one of two things. I mean, you can say, okay, gotcha now, boss. Is it possible that I could talk to you later about a different approach to this? Now, a good boss will say, okay, Jack, yeah, I've got a moment. Maybe, come into my office at the end of the day and let's chat about this. Now, that could be good news or bad news.
Exactly.
But hopefully not on a Friday. But
Absolutely.
But you can just say, okay, boss, if you're interested in these are my perceptions of how we could do it better. And that goes for any kind of conflict, family conflict, same thing.
Right.
I have a different view of this. Would you be willing to hear my view?
I have an employee that works for me. He's going on probably about a year and a half. And because of his perception of how the sandwich should be made, he's never made a sandwich. Technically, he's never made a sandwich correctly in our building ever once. He makes hundreds. They're wonderful. They're tasty. They're great. But he just puts two of the ingredients in a different order because in his mind and because he thinks so, it's better. It has more structural integrity, just a better way. So after months of trying to get him to do it our way, I eat his sandwiches all the time. He'll make me food on a weekly basis and they're amazing. So just like, you know what, do it your way. It works. Okay. But yeah, in his mind, that is the right way.
I've got a thing with olive oil.
Yeah.
I put olive oil in virtually everything.
Okay.
It doesn't go well with chocolate cake, but otherwise, I don't eat that much chocolate.
No, olive oil is the nectar of the gods for sure.
Well, yeah, that's true.
It's good stuff.
Well, buddy, anything you want to say in closing today?
I want to say that anyone listening right now is extremely lucky to be hearing the wisdom of this dude, because Dr. Bittker is a very, very special cat as a doctor, and he's very special as a friend and as a human. So, yeah, it's good stuff.
You're gonna make me cry.
Well, I'm just saying.
All right, buddy.
All right, cool.
One thing out there, if people would like to pick up a book, the book's available on Amazon. It's called Dragon Slaying, and it's focused on how people can better mobilize their heroic self as they confront sadness, depression, anxiety, loss, trauma, and so on.
There's some really cool scenes with dragons in there too. Not really.
You're going to give. Together, we'll be publishing an animated version.
Right, exactly. All right, everybody. Bye. We'll see you next time.
Okay, great.